to be quickly reviewing 6 books that have had a huge impact on my life. The first one is Slaying Your Fear by Adam Lane Smith. And the thing that really stuck with me, and I'm putting this in my own words, and I think I hope I understood him correctly. It's really important to be clear on what your values are. And once we are clear on what our values are, then things fall into place. Because, you know, if you're presented with a difficult situation, the question is, what do I do that lines up with my values? And it helps us to set boundaries with people, because we can say, I deserve peace, and I have to do things this way in order to have peace. I have to live according to my values in order to have peace. So for example, and not everybody's going to choose to do things this way, but this is an example. Say you had a relative who has a drug addiction, and they keep pressuring you for money to pay for the rent, pay for this, pay for whatever. And he didn't give this example. This is the example that's coming to my mind. And they're pressuring you to give them money, but you know that money may go to drugs. What you can say is, I cannot give you cash. I could go to your apartment manager and pay part of your rent, but I cannot hand you cash because, you know, I love you. I cannot do anything to support your drug addiction. That would be an example. You know, I have to do this to have peace of mind. He also talks about investing in people instead of outcomes. So rather than having a particular vision of what you want for that person, you should instead focus on the person themselves. And I found that very helpful. You know, we get afraid for the people that we love, right? And we think, oh, they're going this pathway, it's going to lead to disaster. But maybe we're attached to a certain vision for them when we should be more focused on them as a person. I like this sentence, and I'm going to read it. Investing in people means confrontation becomes necessary. It is not loving to let a friend use heroin without saying something about your concern for their well-being. Yes. He has a YouTube channel that I have found extremely helpful. He also talks about, you know, what is our legacy for our life? What do we envision our legacy to be? Our actions will impact several generations. And he says that, you know, the mistakes aren't what caused the problem. What causes the problem and the ripple effect down generations is when we refuse to admit that we've made mistakes and, you know, take actions to correct them. Our children and the people around us can learn a lot when we admit that we've made mistakes and then take actions to correct them, because everyone makes mistakes. And so it helps to model to them the process of what do you do after you've made a mistake. So this is one of the books that I really love. Another book that I really love is Learned Optimism by Seligman. And he did certain experiments with animals that we would find very upsetting in this day and age, but they were done a long time ago, so they didn't really have the same standards of how to treat animals back then as we do now. However, we still can learn a lot from this, and since they were done, we might as well learn the lessons right? So they took dogs and they put them in cages where one side was electrified and the other side was not electrified. And they would put them on the electrified side, and the dogs would jump around and eventually manage to get over to the side that was not electrified. Then they thought, what if we harnessed the dog on the electrified side so that they couldn't jump? They did that, they zapped him several times. Then they took the harness off and they found that a really high percentage of the dogs didn't even really try to escape. They gave up. So they were like, well, what is that? And they decided to call it learned helplessness. There's two other interesting observations. Well, I think it was about 10% of the dogs, though, didn't become helpless. They took the harness off and they still would jump to the unelectrified side. So it was like, why? Why did those dogs not become helpless like the other 90%? I think it was 90% and 10%. So that was a real question. And the second question was, how do we train the helpless dogs, the dogs who learn helplessness, how do we train them now to be optimistic, to have hope? Their hypothesis about the 10% of dogs who did not become helpless was that they probably had been in challenging situations before, but they had the ability to escape. So for example, a family dog with small children, and the small children pull its fur, pull its ears, those kinds of things. But the dog can run away. The dog can crawl under the bed. And so that dog has a sense of that it can take action to remedy its situation. And so it'd been shocked, harness removed, the dog still remembered, oh, I know how to escape, okay? And their theory was that 90% of dogs who wouldn't escape were probably had grown up in more restricted environments where their actions did not lead to fixing their problems. And so they already were like prone toward helplessness. Then they went about trying to train those helpless dogs so they would stop being helpless. What they did is they put leashes on them, and they would drag them over from the shocking side, the side that shocks, to the side that doesn't shock. And how many times did they have to do this? Well, if I remember correctly, it was between 30 to like 200 times. There were dogs that they had to drag 200 times before those dogs learned that they could take action and escape. So that is learned optimism. Another book that I really like is The School of Life by Dr. Alain de Botton. The main thing I take away from this book is all people are a little bit nutty. And it's just something we have to be prepared for. We all are. I am, you are, our spouses are, our children are. And he said something like, one of the kindest things that we can do for the important people in our life is to explain to them our craziness ahead of time before they get too damaged by it. You know, it's kind of like, hey, this is my hot button. So, you know, when it happens, you'll know, and it's not your fault. Then they're prepared for it, and they're less likely to be damaged by it. I thought that was absolute brilliance. But I mean, I felt like the book was just packed with really good ideas. Another book that I really love. Fourth book. This one is Coming Alive, Tools by Bill Stutz and Barry Michels. And Phil Stutz has a series on Netflix that you can watch. Now this particular book, I think it goes over 4 of his tools, and I think there's another book that is called The Tools that goes over more, and I've read that book too. I like both of them. I use the Grateful Flow like every day, and that is where I like think about things that I'm very grateful for, and I really like feel it, and then I imagine the clouds above parting and seeing the sun above, right? And it's important to be thankful for the really small things in life. You know, we have clean running water in this country, in most of the country. Some places don't, unfortunately. We're not at war in this country. There's countries that are at war, and there's civil war. Just so many things to be grateful for. I have a roof over my head. I have food in my mouth. I have modern medicine. I have people that I love, and for the most part, we live our lives very peacefully. So much to be thankful for. Thank you, Dr. Stutz, and I think he's Dr. Michels too. Then, another book is Getting to Calm. One of the most brilliant things I remember from this book, this is especially for parenting tweens and teens, right? And one of the main things that I remember from this book, and I use it a lot, is when your kid does something that's wrong and they're really, really, really upset, don't talk to them at that time. Wait until they slept on it. Talk to them the next day, because sleeping is going to help them regulate their emotions, and they're going to be in a much better place to listen to you the next day. Okay? Yeah. Be calm, be rational, talk with them a lot. It takes a lot of talking. Then yet another book was Why Does He Do That? And this is mostly about abusive men. But it really extends to abusive women too. There's a lot of good stuff about different types of abuse, and it really helped me to recognize different types of abuse and to really think about what it is they're doing. One of the types that it talked about that I found really fascinating was, and I don't remember what he called it, but it was kind of like the sensitive guy. He's the sensitive guy, he's really, really, really understanding, but you always come away feeling like you did something wrong. It was like, how could you? How could you do that? How could you do that? Well, something being that sensitive and always being upset with you for minor things, that's a form of abuse. I found that really interesting. And I have run into some people like that who, and not just men, women, mothers who are teaching their children to be that way. And I found them very difficult to deal with, because you will always be in the wrong. You cannot win with them because they are so good and so sensitive, and you are, doing things you shouldn't be doing. So I found that the best thing to do is to stay away, distance. There's so much good help out on the internet now. You can find lots of things on how to deal with these situations, and just like they're like tools in your bag to use, right? So, but he's also getting into like when it turns physical, and when do you like pull up stakes and get away, and because he was working with men who the courts ordered to work with him. They were that level.